The site of Aradeti Sorgola is located in the Shida-Kartli Georgian region of eastern Georgia. Its first occupation dates back to the Kura-Araxes culture, and it continued to be occupied until the early Middle Age. The Kura-Araxes occupation is characterized by wattle and double-round shaft and rectilinear structure of domestic character, but includes a portion of a small, possibly culting building. The parts of the site excavated for the Late Bronze Early Iron Age periods put to light different open areas with multiple firing installations devoted to the food preparation. In the Kura-Araxes and the Late Bronze Iron Age layers, the Georgian-Italian Shida-Kartli expedition found various bone and antler objects, which include different types of needles. Some of these tools have particular morphological characteristics. All the needles from the Late Bronze Age layers are different from the remaining ones. In fact, the part of the eye is wider than the wrist of the tool and has a quadrangular shape, a rather strange shape for a common needle. A needle of the Kura-Araxes period has similar characteristics, but the part of its eye in this case is semicircular and slightly wider than the wrist of tool. In all of these cases, the hole of the eyes measured 2.5 to 3 millimeters. Similar tools have been found in a Late Bronze Age site in Lavia. These tools have a circular or semicircular proximal part with one or two very wide eyes. They have been interpreted as pins. Other similar tools come from Hungary, where the archaeologists found some bronze-pointed tools with a wider proximal part and very large holes. These were interpreted as pins as well. The functional traces found on the surfaces of these Aradeti tools, however, are very similar to experimental vegetable traces. So, are the Aradeti bone tools needles or pins? My hypothesis is that these tools are in fact needles, which, because of the special shape, were probably used in basketry. The hypothesis is corroborated by the shape of modern basketry needles that also have the part of the eyes wider than to the wrist of the tool. In order to confirm or disprove the hypothesis, two examples of these tools have been reproduced. The one of the Kura-Araxes period, with semicircular proximal part, and the other of Late Bronze Age, with quadrangular proximal part. During the experimental reconstruction, I used modern metal tools and limestone with sand for shaping them. The holes are made by a pump drill with a bronze point. The needles reproduced are used for stitching the soft and semi-hard leather. Both reproduction of the Aradeti Sorgola needles, however, proved unsuccessful with various leather types. In fact, in both cases, the proximal part is too wide and cannot pierce the leather, except with a considerable effort, and in this case, leaving very big holes in the leather. In a later stage of the experiment, the needles were used by the artisan Giovanni Morra, who used them in the production of baskets. Giovanni chose to reproduce two of the main known techniques of basket making. The first is sewed coiling, and the second is the sewed braid coiling. In both cases, the artisan used Ampelodesmus mauritanicus, an herbaceous perennial plant, native to Mediterranean climate region and widely distributed in Italy, but also in other European areas, as well as in Turkey and Asia Minor. The first technique is soft coiling, with which Giovanni made a basket. The technique consists in twisting together some fibers of Ampelodesmus, thus creating a loop into which a bread rush wire is passed several times. It goes round and, when a rush wire ends, the residue is twisted with the wrist of the ampelodesmus to block it. And then the new jogging thread is sewn with the needle to start again with the bread. For these steps, both needles worked properly, especially at points where the plot was wider. The second technique used to make the basket is the sewed braid coiling. This technique consists to create the braids with 7 rows of ampelodesmus and tied together with needles. In this case, Giovanni made braids with a very wide warp. Again, both needles proved to be suitable for this technique. In fact, the wide proximal part did not interfere with the work that was successfully completed. The morphology of these specific tools is very important to understand how they were used. If their proximal part is too big for their use as leather needles, their holes are probably too small for their use as pins. For this reason, my hypothesis is that these specific tools are needles used in basketry. Indeed, besides their most common use for sewing tissues and leather, needles also are used in basketry activity. In fact, the modern needles used in this activity have a shape very similar to our archaeological tools, even if they have much larger eyes. The experimental reproduction of the tools and their tentative use in different craft activities has been really important in order to test this hypothesis. With the help of Giovanni Morra, a specialist in basketry, the experimental needles were used in 2 different techniques of this activity. In both cases, the slightly large shape of the experimental tools has been efficient for the job. More specifically, the needles proved very efficient in sewed braid coiling. For this reason, my present hypothesis is that these tools were used to make coarse baskets with large warps. An alternative hypothesis is that these needles, or some of them, may have been used in other activities, such as weaving, and perhaps used with the loom. In fact, basketry is older than weaving, and techniques and tools have been handed down from one activity to the other. But this alternative hypothesis will be verified in future experimentation and study. However, these needles played a very specific role within the economy of the Bronze Age community of Varadeti Sorgora.